Hey everyone, welcome to Youth Bombs. I'm Craig.
I'm David.
And I'm Holden.
And we're the voice of young conservatives in Alachua County. In an effort to shrink the bureaucracy, President Trump and his DOGE efforts are working to give buyouts to federal employees, asking them to quit their jobs, and in exchange they'll receive a severance package. About 5 to 10% of the employees who receive the offer will take it. Holden, is this a good effort to shrink the bureaucracy, or would you do it differently?
I would certainly do it differently. It's a good initiative, I'd say, but generally what you want to do is you want to say, should the government be doing this? And the answer is no. So how do we make it so that they don't do it anymore? So privatize as fast as possible, as quickly as possible. There's a good guy, economist I know, he says, if it moves, privatize it, and if it doesn't move, privatize it. And so everything doesn't move, or either moves or doesn't move, privatize everything. And I like that. So you just privatize it as fast as possible, because unfortunately the state is just not going to be efficient. So it's just a fantasy. You gotta get the state out of trying to allocate economic capital as fast as labor as fast as possible. So yeah, that's what I would do. Trying to run it yourself, as great as Musk is, he can't run the government. So yeah.
I gotcha. Though I think within the parameters of what is possible with the Trump administration, given that Congress likely won't want to shrink government much at all, or that would be a rather difficult ask, especially given the composition of the Senate, that perhaps is this the best that we can hope for at the moment?
I mean, I would say that the best you could do is to try and get as many bills passed, or on the table at least, to privatize in a rational way, where it makes sense, the more companies could ease into it. So I would do that as fast as possible. Like, same with welfare, phase it out in a way that makes sense, and entitlements are going to be the vast majority of the federal budget, transfer payments. So you want to have a way of getting rid of that that's rational, to make it so that people who are receiving those benefits can get off of it and find jobs. People who are on unemployment benefits, I think they're like 1.9 million people right now. It's like at a 6-year high. So you got a lot of that. And so you want to find a way to make it so that they don't need to have that as much anymore, and eventually they can support themselves. So I'd say just, I would say do that. And also, I mean, yeah, once again, I think that generally firing federal bureaucrats is a good idea, because obviously their incentive as a government department is to spend as much money as possible, because that justifies more money in the future. So, if you don't spend a certain amount, then it's like you don't get more money. So of course they're going to spend as much money as possible and be as inefficient as possible. So, yeah.
Gotcha. David, what do you think of these efforts and how DOGE is doing so far?
Well, I think that the effort is to create a smaller and more efficient government. And this is a good step in the way, because that's a step before privatization. Before privatization, you need a smaller and more efficient government. And that's just what this is trying to do. Because only 6% of all federal employees were working full-time and showing up in office. A lot of these guys are just wasting time playing their video games, watching their TV, doing who knows what. And basically just wasting taxpayer money in order to not do anything at all. This buyout is going to allow employees to receive payment up till 8 months after they leave. And it's still going to be cheaper than going through all the union contracts and all this useless crap that is basically used to keep people who aren't working still working and taking advantage of the American people. So this just really sets a good precedent for DOGE, which is, its goal again isn't to dissolve the government. It's just to create a smaller one and to create a more efficient one, and to take out a lot of the useless parts of it in which there's a lot of spending in. And this is, we definitely do spend a lot on federal employees, and people who work for the government should be showing up to work at least. Then they have to show up to work. If you're not showing up to work, then that's not a good sign. But I do agree that privatization is always the best option. I mean, if you just look at what NASA was doing, SpaceX is doing so much more than NASA, because people are more incentivized when you work in a privatized environment. You have to make money. If you don't make money, if you don't make the best product for the lowest price, then you're not gonna be able to compete against all of these other factions. But this is a good step in the right direction, I believe. This is gonna give us a smaller and more efficient government.
I agree, and it's nice to look at the US debt clock in the DOGE section. The rest is very discouraging, but we can see that DOGE has saved taxpayers about $40 billion thus far. So some people had said, it won't do anything, it won't get anywhere, but this is an initiative that is working, is saving taxpayer dollars. I think it needs more time to continue to cut out waste, fraud, and abuse and neglect in the system, but it's doing a great job so far of offering buyouts so that we have a smaller federal workforce, canceling DEI contracts, eliminating things that just aren't needed at the end of the day, and having a smaller, leaner, more efficient operation. Because we have so much waste, we're $36 trillion in debt, and very few people seem to care. And the spending is popular, and that's what's concerning. So given that, the executive branch, I believe, has a lot of hard work to do to get us to the point where we're in a sustainable position, because they can only do so much, but they should maximize what they can do, since Congress probably won't play ball. Holden, how do you feel about, say, the efforts thus far, how it's going, and if you disagree or agree that Congress would want to cut spending?
I certainly agree with you that Congress is not, in that they don't want to cut spending. It's very clear that they don't want, they're not going to touch the major line items of the budget. And then I'd say, as far as DOGE goes, are they getting closer to their goal was $2 trillion, or Elon Musk said $2 trillion out loud. And whenever he said that, I said, if you want to cut $2 trillion out of the budget, they're going to have to make reforms to Social Security or some entitlement, Medicare or Medicaid or something like that, or defense. Because right now, entitlements, defense, and interests are making up. If the government only spent money on entitlements, defense, and interests, the budget deficit would be more than $1 trillion. So, yeah. So it's just not enough money. You'd have to you still would have like $1 trillion still to cut if you cut everything else out of the budget to get that to that $2 trillion goal, if my math is correct right now. So, I appreciate the effort and all that stuff. That's great, but I'd say mostly the best thing that they could do is you want the economy to be more productive, because that's going to make tax revenue rise. So, right, like there's this theory, an economic theory, that U.S. government tax revenue as a percentage of GDP stays constant, and what changes it is productivity. It's not really the tax rate. So regardless of the tax rate, you still get the same amount of revenue. And of course, the reason why you would get the same amount of revenue with a higher tax rate compared to a lower tax rate is simply because there's more productivity with the lower tax rate, even though you get the same amount of revenue. The United States could have a smaller tax rate than most countries, and we'll bring in more revenue than every country virtually, because our economy is just much more productive than most economies are. So if you want to raise tax revenue, you need to make the economy more productive, and that will make it so that the budget deficit is much smaller as a percentage of GDP. You want to decrease regulation and make it very easy for businesses to get going and for them to actually make compelling economic goods. So that would be the focus. Also, like tariffs is a really bad thing for that, of course, because productivity, all else held constant, goes down. So that makes it so tax revenue, all else held constant, goes down. So you want to, now, if tariffs aren't high enough to discourage enough buying, then they could actually make tax revenue go up, because at the end of the day, they are bringing in tax revenue. But output will fall in that circumstance regardless. So you just got to be, that's what I would focus on, because that's where you're going to be able to move the needle the most. How could you productivity the most to make it so that tax revenue is sufficiently maximized to make it so that even though the government is going to spend an enormous amount of money, we still could make it so that the budget deficit is as small as possible. Because with these budget deficits, it's so disastrous for the economy right now. So, I could explain why, but I don't want to take up too much time.
Yeah, it's certainly sad to see how much debt we're in, the present situation. I'm hoping that economic growth, as Holden said, can be unleashed. And just looking at the way the government has been running with its very large and expensive and opulent buildings that, as David mentioned, only 6% of federal employees are coming in to the office full time. So you have all this waste on huge office spaces that we can certainly shrink down, because we can shrink down the size of the bureaucracy, we can shrink down the size of the number of employees, we can shrink the number of agencies, and of course, we can shrink down the office size and thereby save more money, spending less on rent and buildings and maintenance. David, I want to get you with the closing thought on this. Overall, where do you see the effort of DOGE going?
I see the effort of DOGE going into just reducing, like, to put it in layman's terms, reducing spending, basically, to cut off all the waste that is all the parasites that are leaching off of the government, and to just create a more efficient economy. But I want to go back to what you were saying, Holden, about all the tariffs and how that wouldn't be good for the economy and stuff. And it is true that the government is taking itself in matters into its own hands by getting tariffs, like Trump just announced tariffs to Mexico and to Canada. But also that's also a response to Mexico's unwillingness to stop the human trafficking and the child sex trafficking. It keeps on going through the border, not willing to keep their illegal immigrants into their country. They're not willing to stop these migrant caravans from coming across the state, and they're endangering the American people. And with lowering regulations and allowing people to compete more inside the American economy, I think would just open up so much more efficiency. If we were to lower the regulations, then you have startup companies creating their own companies and being able to finally get into competition with all the large corporations that run this monopoly on the government. I just think that would be great for efficiency and would help lower the GDP. So I'm really hoping for DOGE. I'm hoping that we can get a lot of the federal employees that are just wasting time out of the way, and I'm hoping that we can cut a lot of government spending, a lot of the federal buildings that we're not using at all.
Mm-hmm. Understandable. And that being said, thanks everyone so much for watching. We really appreciate it. We upload 3 times a week. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you have any questions for us, feel free to reach out at youthbombs@electoralrepublicans.com. Thanks so much, everyone.